Tonight, so much to talk about. Another one of the foreign criminals let loose by the Albanese government. A child sex offender faces court on new offences as the Prime Minister covers.
So how many criminals have been released?
The Federal Department provide the information at the appropriate time.
Not telling. Plus, are supermarkets ripping us off? Or is the government just looking for a scapegoat for its cost of living crisis? We'll go through the figures. And the New South Wales government's diversity officials tell public servants which days are special, like Lesbian Visibility Day, World Menopause Day. We'll go through their extraordinary list and ask why, and why are we paying for this? Also tonight, in what's been a rough day for the government, more embarrassment for Climate Change Minister Chris Bowen and that Butte electric ute he was trying to sell to tradies. Plus, plenty more, including, can you believe this, Woolworths is now banning sales of Australia Day merchandise, and it is political. But first, and related to exactly that, this weirdness, particularly under this Albanese government. How did we get to the point where so few Australians think that Australia is worth their time defending? Where this government is running so short of soldiers and sailors that it's actually saying it might now ask Pacific Islanders to join our armed forces instead, to be mercenaries, paid by us to defend us. But every day another penny drops. You think that's why it's the trashing of Australia and its traditions. That explains it. And today I'll give you an incredible example. Now, I read that a Melbourne council, and it's not one of those crazy left-wing ones that you find in so many places in Melbourne. This one's from an eastern suburbs area where I used to live. I thought it was quite reasonable, but it's now had a bright idea for Australia Day. This shows how far the rot has spread. For Australia Day, it is going to have a day of healing. Apparently because Australia Day is so traumatic and terrible. It's a day of healing where you can hear the healing words of Professor Auntie Diane Kerr, who's a fellow at Melbourne University's Indigenous Knowledge Institute, and is helping this university's medical researchers. Now, the fact that a council and even Melbourne's leafier suburbs thinks Australia Day should actually be a day of healing, where we hear the woes of Aboriginal Australians, well, that's actually sad enough. I mean, where's the pride in this great country? But then I checked on this Professor Auntie Diane Kerr. Here she is, this Aboriginal elder. I mean, seriously, her father is white, but she identifies as Aboriginal because she says some of her mother's ancestors are. Well, I don't doubt that, but can we just get over this ludicrous division by race, where a council hires as an Aboriginal, someone with plenty of white ancestry as well, to tell us white settlement was terrible, etc., and we should feel guilty, but why not her? She's got plenty of Aboriginal ancestry, non-Aboriginal ancestry. So, this is quite insulting and quite dumb. But unfortunately, this story gets even worse. Australia should be celebrating how rich it is, how healthy, how comfortable and peaceful life is here. For so many people, migrants from all over the world come here because of it. And almost all of this is because of Western science and medicine. That's part of this country's Western heritage. That should be celebrated too. Instead, more shame, more kowtowing. Melbourne University, which should be a temple of that Western science and medicine, has actually hired and promoted this Professor Auntie Di to tell us to treat infections in children, among others, with Aboriginal medicines that she says she's used. And this lecture, swear to God, is actually on the University of Melbourne's website, to its shame.
Too much antibiotics are used on our children, so I want them to stop that. My vision is to have, like the nunkeries in South Australia, is have our people beside the doctor and offer our Indigenous healing. You know, for example, I know that with ulcers, we make a paste out of old manweed, put it on the wound, put bark on it, and it will heal. And I use old man weed every day. My friend has made it into a tea because I have a lot of chronic illness. And I told my doctor, and my doctor got on her computer and was looking, and she says, I can't find it. I said, no, it's a weed. And she said, be very careful. And I said, I don't have to be careful of my business.
That, ladies and gentlemen, is a professor at Melbourne University, which I should remind you also hires Professor Bruce Pascoe. Now, when even one of our top universities sells out Western medicine to this kind of neo-primitive treatment, so-called, using weeds, we're really going to the pack. I mean, where is the pride in what we've built and how indeed we built it in Western science and technology? I tell you where it's going. It's going almost gone, with 81 councils now saying they won't hold Australia Day citizenship ceremonies. And with the Albanese government saying public servants, they don't have to celebrate Australia Day either. They can take another day off instead if they object to the day. Well, I tell you what, a proud government of a proud country would instead say, well, if you can't celebrate this country and its culture on its national day, you don't deserve the day off. Use it or lose it. But I'm afraid that's not how this government thinks. And it isn't how many of our elites think either, which is, again, maybe why so many Australians feel it's not worth serving in the defence of this nation. And I'll give you a final example, because today we also learn that 100,000 of those immigrants this government's letting in have failed the citizenship test under this government. 35% of all the people who are sitting this test in the last year and a half or so to become a citizen failed. Under the previous government, the coalition government, 20% failed. This government, 35%, nearly double. Go figure, is it because this government doesn't preach our virtues? And this test is not hard. It's multiple choice for a start. And you only need to get 15 questions right out of 20. And they are multiple choice and dead easy as well. Like, hey, what's the capital of Australia? Is it Brisbane? Is it Canberra? Or another one, should people in Australia make an effort to learn English? Ooh, that's a tough one. Should we make an effort to learn English? I mean, hello? But here's the thing. Check the reaction of Immigration Minister Andrew Giles to learning that so many people flunked this citizenship test, as if they couldn't be buggered learning the most basic things about this country that's going to give them welfare and a passport. Oh, said Immigration Minister Andrew Giles. Remember, this is the bloke who let out almost 150 foreigners, including serious criminals, from immigration detention without taking the most basic steps to keep us safe. Oh, said Andrew Giles, maybe we should change this test to suit the immigrants instead of insisting that immigrants learn to suit Australia. Or in his words, this is how he actually put it, the government is committed to a citizenship system that is fair, efficient and inclusive. That's a giveaway word, inclusive. And it will continue to assess the citizenship test to ensure that it meets community expectations. Well, let me tell Andrew Giles that in my opinion, probably most Australians have an expectation, exactly like my own. It's for this government to actually put a higher price on Australian unity, on its pride, on its citizenship, and may I just say, its medicine, to promote what unites us and not divide, to promote pride in this country and not shame. And I think this year we should fight back against this trashing of Australia. Well, who will ever risk their life defending this country again? Now, as I said, it's been a rough day for the government, which seems to have lost all discipline and coherence. I mean, yes, there was good news for the government and for Australians today. A bigger fall in inflation than was expected. It's fallen from 4.9% to 4.3%. That's big. It's a relief. Although, it's still too high. Prices still rising too fast. And with this, the public getting quite restless about this, the government has tried desperately to look like it's doing something about this cost of living crisis. But that something actually means just making a scapegoat of the supermarket giants Coles and Woolworths. Like they're, ripping off shoppers, it's them. Now, the government's just announced a new inquiry by former Labor Minister Craig Emerson on whether we need new government rules to bring down supermarket prices, or at least to let shoppers know the difference between what those supermarkets are paying for the food they're selling and what shoppers actually must pay themselves.
That isn't being passed on to consumers, and it's not good enough. We need to make sure that people are treated fairly and they get a fair go. It's not acceptable to see record profits at a time when people are doing it so tough.
Wicked supermarkets. The Greens are actually taking credit for this inquiry, with leader Adam Band accusing Coles and Woolies of price gouging and raking in obscene profits. $2 billion combined, he said. We're joining me is a panel: Michael Costa, former New South Wales Labor Treasurer, and Cameron Milner, former Chief of Staff to Labor leader Bill Shorten and now Director of GXO Strategies. Michael, is there a real issue here? Because we have, I know we've got plenty of farmers saying they're getting paid peanuts and shoppers are getting ripped off. But Coles and Woolies are actually making a profit of 2.5 cents, around there, 2.5 cents on every dollar spent with them. Is that really price gouging?
Well, it's certainly been the case for a number of years, decades in fact, that Australian supermarkets are probably twice as profitable as say UK supermarkets, but that doesn't really come to the heart of this question. As I said, that's been the case for decades. Why have they chosen at this particular point? Obviously for the political reason of trying to get the heat on cost of living. But I'll just make the point, if you take Brandt's figures there, $2 billion, there's sort of, roughly 26 million people in the country. That sort of works out around, $78, $79 per person per year profit. Which is extraordinarily small. And, to come to the political point, if Labor was to deliver its $275 for the average family, which is 2.5 people or 2.6 people, that would more than offset the so-called profit gouging of the supermarket. So, look, there is a problem, but this is all a diversion tactic, a tactic to look somewhere else. If Labor was to deliver their energy savings, they would more than offset some of that profit margin, and that's the real issue here. It's
that's a good point.
A diversion.
Karen Milner, is that $275 that Labor promised to cut our power bills by, and instead it's gone through the roof? Let's go to that, because the government really did want inquiries into rising prices. Why doesn't it have one on something that it's itself responsible for? Electricity prices, and how green policies just make things worse. Why not that instead of inquiry into supermarkets?
Well, look, the inquiry to the supermarkets is the first time in 16 years a Labor government's had a grocery price inquiry. So they don't come along that often, whereas the price regulation for power prices is annual. It goes to the independent regulator. Power companies have to submit their costings, and it's price capped every year. So they're quite different in terms of the energy prices compared to grocery prices. But coming back to your point before, this is a diversion tactic by Albanese. He's not really tackling the real cost of living. He's not pulling the levers of government. He's asked his close mate, Dr. Craig Emerson, who is as close to Albo as Gartrell and Jody is. Like, he's on inside of the Albo team. He wrote Albo's election strategy. He wrote the small target strategy, and Albo's asked him to help him with the cost of living issue with 2 supermarket chains. It's an inside job. It's an inside job, Andrew.
That is very interesting. To another issue today, Michael, the government says it won't tell us when it's going to release more convicted criminals for immigration. If it does that, it'll do it every month. It's not going to tell us when it's done it. Just, you've got to wait. And it won't tell us if they then break the law. It's just going to give those numbers once a month. Here's the Prime Minister.
There's been absolutely no change in any of the policy and the information that was given under the former government when Peter Dutton was the Minister for Home Affairs. No change whatsoever.
So how many criminals have been released?
Well, there's been no change whatsoever when
But sorry, that's not the question. The question is how many?
Well, the Federal Department provide the information at the appropriate time in the same way that they always have.
So the official strategy is say nothing, just string it out. And I can understand why, Michael, because as it turns out, this very day, one of the 149 detainees that did release last year, faced court today, caught by police with several Facebook accounts on his mobile phone he hadn't told them about. So how's the government handling this issue, do you think?
Well, clearly this is a media management strategy. And look, it's disingenuous to say there's been no change. There was a High Court decision that they rushed around, in the dying hours of the last session of Parliament to try and, plug a hole. So there has been a significant change, and the public's entitled to know what the consequence of that particular decision. It doesn't matter what was happening before on a monthly basis. There's been a change, and they really do need to be forthright about this and be transparent. But clearly this is just a usual media strategy. It's probably going to be released on, once a month on a Friday afternoon. You know the tactic, Andrew.
But Cameron, this is outrageous. I mean, it goes to public safety, among other things. Why wouldn't the government just tell us on time when it releases criminals into the community? I mean, this is just, where's that promise of transparency in government?
And didn't they know this High Court decision was coming? I mean, what were their lawyers doing? What was Dreyfus doing as the Attorney General? Why didn't they have legislation ready to go? What we do know, Andrew, is there are assassins and rapists and pedophiles and slave traders in our community now as a consequence of the High Court decision and the failure of the Albanese government to get legislation through to lock them back up the next moment. They're dilly-dallying and everything else. That's their problem. Their problem is that a guy in Dreyfus's electorate was texting children in neighbouring electorates like Dunkley. That's what's been happening on Albanese's watch.
But
that's what's changed,
unforgivable.
Andrew.
How you could possibly excuse this. But Cameron, just staying with you, you used to be a Labor State Secretary in Queensland. You've written now a tough piece on Albanese in the Australian Today, calling him a fake. Why is that?
Well, we've known Albanese for a long time. He's been in the public eye for a long time. As a young man, he was a radical. Michael Costa, you'd know that too from your time. A young man who was a radical lefty, hard on his sleeve. That was the image. But as Prime Minister, he's insipid and timid. He dumped the Republic, for goodness sake. He lost on The Voice. We get that he lost The Voice, and he had a good sook after claiming he was a conviction politician for one moment, one evening. But he's gone off piece completely, and now he's dumped the Republic as well. I'm asking myself as a Labor person, what does he stand for? The 20-year-old Albo would not know the 60-year-old Albo at all. This is a guy who's gone from the Housing Commission to being a landlord with multi-million-dollar properties. He's completely out of touch, and completely out of touch with the radical person supposedly he once was. So either he was fake then, as a 20-year-old, saying what was supposed to be said there, or he's fake now because he hasn't held himself to his own convictions and his own principles.
Well, Michael Costa, I mean, can you defend him? I mean, after all, we all grow. I worked twice for the Labor Party. You yourself were of the quite hard left. We all grow, we all learn. Is that what's happened to Anthony Albanese?
Well, look, I have to say that I prefer any Albanese other than the one in his 20s that I had to deal with at New South Wales conferences, because he was certainly on the extreme edge and quite effective, unfortunately, in those views. So a moderate Albanese is better than a more, let's put it, traditional Albanese. However, having said that, the real issue here is not just Albanese, it's the whole government. Their policies are all over the place. You talk about cost of living. We've got two things coming up this year that I think is going to cause all sorts of problems in terms of cost of living pressures and the economic position of the country, and that is, Chris Bowen's mad schemes on energy and Tony Burke's crazy IR reforms that are going to cause additional costs right through the supply chain and lead to reduced productivity. They're the things that concern me. I think the whole government doesn't have a proper vision or a strategy. And as for the Republic, they can dump that because it's going to go nowhere, as The Voice went nowhere. They need to focus on these economic issues, the real ones, and stop making decisions that make it worse. Do nothing rather than make decisions that make things worse. And that's what they're doing at the moment.
Michael Costa and Cameron Milner, great to talk to you both. Thank you very much for your time. After the break a year ago, Alice Springs exploded into violence and the Prime Minister was forced to drop in briefly to fix it. You might remember that visit, a couple of hours and then back to the tennis or something. A year on, what's really changed there? Plus, Queensland's record crime. It's been a year since Alice Springs exploded into the politics of this country. I mean, shocking violence there and probably our most famous outback town, especially among young Aborigines, even children. It became such a national scandal that it forced the Prime Minister to fly there for a couple of hours and announce plans to fix it. Well, that violence and the Prime Minister's delayed and brief reaction also helped to kill off his plans for the Voice, an Aboriginal-only advisory parliament, which more and more voters were then seeing as just a talk shop while real problems were out there getting basically no proper attention. Now, like I said, it's a year later, and Matt Cunningham, our Northern Australian correspondent, has gone to Alice to see what's changed since then, and he joins me now. Matt Cunningham, great to see you. Now, listen, one change you've already told us that you have noticed is how many shops now in Alice Springs have heavy-duty security screens over the windows and doors at night. Tell us what's going on.
Well, this is something we were starting to see 12 months ago, Andrew, but I can tell you how noticeable it is now in Alice Springs. I mean, I walked down the Todd Mall in the centre of Alice Springs this morning. It's a place where 5 years ago it was sort of a bustling tourist hub. There were cafes, there were tourist shops. Now it is just wall-to-wall roller shutters and boarded-up windows. I mean, almost every second business in the Todd Mall appears to be closed, and they have this heavy-duty security to stop the windows being smashed. And where that security is not in place, there'll be a window that more than likely is smashed. I mean, it really was something like a ghost town in there this morning. A really depressing scene, I'd have to say, and locals say they're really aghast at the state of the CBD, and in particular the Todd Mall. I would say it was in stark contrast, Andrew, to what I'd seen just 5 or 6 hours earlier. Last night I went for a drive around Alice Springs from about just before midnight until about 2 a.m. with Darren Clark, who runs the Action for Alice Facebook page. And there were dozens of young children, some probably as young as 8 or 9, who were just wandering the streets of the CBD unsupervised. This is not a new thing, but it's certainly not something that if we see it as an issue, and of course I think we should see it as an issue, children that age wandering around unsupervised at that time of night, it's certainly not an issue that's been addressed in the past 12 months.
No, remind us again what the Prime Minister promised a year ago, and tell us how much of it's worked. I mean, I think the future of the children for me is always the most important thing, but the issue that he dealt with the most of all was booze, rampant drunkenness. Tell us what he promised and how it's gone.
Well, I think he deserves credit for doing something that, you know, should have been as plain as the nose on your face, but the Northern Territory government hadn't managed to do it, and that was to reinstate the alcohol bans in Aboriginal town camps, not just in Alice Springs, but also in places like Tennant Creek and Katherine and other smaller Indigenous communities. The Northern Territory government in July 2022 had allowed alcohol to return to those places with disastrous consequences. I think we've seen in the statistics that since those alcohol bans were reinstated after the Prime Minister's visit last January, we saw the number of alcohol-fuelled hospital presentations, the number of domestic violence, alcohol-related assaults fall again quite significantly. They're still at levels that really represent a national crisis, but they're lower than they were 12 months ago. What we haven't seen come down and what we're now seeing increase quite seriously are levels of property crime, Andrew. I was looking at some of the statistics today. Over the past 7 years, house break-ins in Alice Springs have gone up by 260%. Commercial break-ins are up by about 160%, and property damage is up by almost 100% on the levels that we saw here in 2016. So I suppose that explains to a large degree why you're seeing those roller shutters over pretty much every business window in town.
Well, there's a real crisis in some Aboriginal communities, and Alice Springs is feeling it particularly. But it's not just there that's had trouble, has it, Matt? I mean, Queensland has such serious levels of youth crime. In fact, it's just recorded its worst crime levels in 2 decades. Now, sure, not all the offenders are Aboriginal by a long shot, but in the first 3 months of a bail crackdown last year, 111 of the 169 children charged were Indigenous, even though they're in the minority. What lessons can we learn from the last year of trying to grapple with these problems?
Well, there's no doubt that you're seeing those issues in Queensland as well, in Townsville and Cairns in particular. I think we can learn lessons about really bad government policy, Andrew. I mean, I'm not an expert on Queensland, but I can certainly talk you through the policy changes that have been made in the Northern Territory over the past 7 years that have been disastrous at many levels. You and I have spoken at great length about the Royal Commission that was held here into youth detention. It had more than 200 recommendations, but some of those recommendations, a lot of those recommendations, made it more difficult for police to get young people who were doing the wrong thing off the street, to take them into custody. Senior police I've spoken to privately say it really has made their job more difficult. We saw after COVID-19, we saw the doubling of welfare payments and the allowance of early access to superannuation that in Aboriginal communities in the Northern Territory had a disastrous effect. We know that when they have more money, more sit-down money that goes into their bank accounts, the results can be quite devastating, and we saw that play out. And then we saw the lifting of those alcohol bans in town camps that I was speaking about previously. I think, there are three things that have contributed to the crisis that people in Alice Springs say is still playing out today, and we're also seeing in other parts of the Northern Territory. Look at what's happening in Wadair at the moment, and there are other parts of the Territory, Katherine as well, and Tennant Creek, that are really dealing with some serious issues, particularly when it comes to alcohol abuse and when it comes to crime.
And meanwhile, Aboriginal Affairs or Indigenous Australians Minister Linda Burney has been not cited or heard from for months now. After The Voice, she seems to have gone mute because there's been absolutely no fresh ideas on how to deal with any of this. I thought she should have been sacked over the holidays, get someone new in, maybe Mullindiri McCarthy, someone, but it looks like it's all on autopilot now. Matt Cunningham, thank you so much indeed for your work. Really appreciate it. After the break, Woolworths' real sin. It's banned sales of Australia Day merchandise, and it actually admits this is political. I'm going to make a real issue of this year, this trashing of Australia, because it's already blowing up in our face now. Today, another example, and from Woolworths, would you believe, after just defending them. How woke is this? Last year it campaigned for The Voice, should have learned a lesson. Now it's announced it is not going to sell any Australia Day merchandise in store. And this is not just the commercial decision. It's also political, because it says, yes, there's been a gradual decline in demand for Australia Day merchandise from our stores over recent years. At the same time, there's been a broader discussion about January 26 and what it means to different parts of the community. Joining me again this year is Sophie Ellsworth, media writer for the Australian newspaper. Sophie, thanks for your time. Lovely to see you again. Why does Woolworths let shoppers who are against Australia Day stop it from selling Australia Day merchandise to people who are all for it?
Well, as you said, Andrew, they're claiming that this is a commercial decision and also with the animosity towards January 26, they think this is a smart decision. But as you reminded viewers, they were the supermarket that threw their, or Big W, owned by the same company, threw their support behind The Voice and were putting announcements over, their loudspeakers in the lead up to The Voice, showing their support, and that to pull that. Are they not listening? Did they not notice that a majority of Australians voted no to The Voice? And there are a lot of Australians who do want to celebrate Australia Day. So what's the harm in putting a few items on a shelf and letting us as the shoppers make our own decisions whether we want to buy some Australia Day merchandise or not, Andrew?
Exactly correct. I think they're just out of touch with their audience. I think it must be the ponytails in marketing who are running that joint. But Sophie, I rang you with this news. I said, let's talk about this tonight. You were standing in a Coles supermarket. What did you find there?
I was, Andrew. I mean, the timing was brilliant. So I was in my local Coles supermarket. I went up to the manager and asked her. I couldn't find any Australia Day merchandise. I asked her if they'd be selling it. She was very polite but slightly awkward. She called over another staff member and they said, oh, we don't think we're getting any Australia Day merchandise. you'll have to try another Coles. Seemed very bizarre. Mind you, I do live in the electorate of Goldstein that has voted massively yes. So I looked online, Andrew, the Coles website. Don't get too worried. They're selling koala face masks and echidna serviettes. So there's still some hope for us, I guess, Andrew, if you want to try and celebrate Australia Day.
Well, I feel almost a moral duty to go down to my local Coles in the next town and buy up big on echidna serviettes or whatever it was. But to the media, Sophie, the ABC this week admitted it was wrong for an ABC reporter who's Muslim to publish this ABC TikTok video promoting, in my opinion, a boycott of all Israeli products. Here she is.
Notice anything about this fridge? There's no Coke, Fanta or Sprite, and that's a very deliberate choice.
I've worked out that I was spending close to 40 to 50 grand a year on just Israeli and American products. I've been in the boycotting of those products now for just under 2 months.
Oz is one of many people taking part in the Palestinian-led boycott divestment scheme, which is a movement that lists brands that supporters of Palestinians are discouraged from buying from because they have some sort of tie to Israel, according to BDS, whether it's donating money or associating with certain people.
Now, I note, by the way, that this ABC reporter, an Australian, actually identifies as Palestinian in her ABC bio. Does, Sophie, the ABC seem properly sorry that it publishes rabid anti-Israeli incitement?
Well, Andrew, this is sort of typical of the ABC, because what tends to happen in these situations is you and I both know is complaints flood in, they take down the content, we write a story, and then they sort of go, oh, we're kind of sorry, but not sorry. What I want to know is how this got published. It shouldn't matter whether the reporter is Palestinian or not, but that report that went on TikTok was so one-sided. It had no refuting arguments. It was so biased. I want to know how that actually got through the checkpoints. Don't forget, ABC have about 4,000 staff. They've got plenty of people on the ground there to go, we should not publish this. We should check it before it publishes. So again, they fixed it up. They republished it. They've turned the comments off the TikTok video, Andrew, but I don't really think this is good enough from the public broadcaster. This just keeps happening time and time again.
Yes, just this week the ABC put out a statement, oh, we've rejigged it, we've balanced it up a bit, but I don't think that. And I might point out this reporter still had up another TikTok on her own account of an interview she did do with the ABC about the boycott of Zara, the clothing shop, for its alleged links to Israel. So there's, like you say, sorry, not sorry. But to a problem, Sophie, that I have, that I think is stopping us from revealing just how terrible the Hamas terrorists are, the guys that run Gaza and attacked Israel and started this war. Hamas has released video of 4 of the hostages it took 3 months ago. These are women still in captivity, 3 teenagers, and the video is shocking. You see their scarred and scared and bloodied and bruised faces. You hear whimpering. But all I can show you here are these still photographs, which are less confronting. Now, ACMA, the television watchdog, has issued guidance against showing anything too distressing. We've also decided not to show anything too confronting since children are watching, or indeed not to show video that plays into the terrorists' hands. But I have to say, Sophie, the cost of this is that it also stops us from showing just how cruel Hamas really is.
Well, Andrew, it's a very fine line in situations like this, I believe, because, as you say, it's very confronting. People deserve to know what is happening. It's very important when any of these images or videos come out that they are verified, of course. But I guess the point here, Andrew, is that ACMA, the media regulator, the buck stops with them. And if they determine these rules, it's up to the broadcasters to follow them. But yes, it presents problems. In saying that, Hamas probably want these videos out there too. They probably want people to see the cruel acts they're doing. Perhaps not. But this is a very fine line and a difficult one. But ACMA make the rules, and that's the decision that they've made.
Well, it's a decision we made too, and I understand it. But like I say, it's incredibly frustrating because I still hope that if you see how evil the terrorists are, that you won't be motivated to join them, you'll be motivated to oppose them. And maybe quite so many young Australians wouldn't be marching in the street against Israel, might be starting to chant against Hamas for a change. Sophie Ellsworth, thank you so much for your time. Got to say something quickly before we go to the ad break. New South Wales Liberal Party President Jason Falinski was a Liberal in the federal Liberal MP until the last election, lost his seat to a Teal. And now there's a headline. Now that his New South Wales Liberal Party President Jason Falinski backs a 2035 target, a climate target. He wants the party to set a new climate target for 2035, just like the Labor government is demanding the government do, and it's the opposition do, and the opposition doesn't really want to, doesn't want to get down that route. Now, I got to say, Jason, you were as left-wing as all get out, nice guy, but you were as left as all get out, and you still lost your seat in New South Wales to a Teal. The New South Wales Liberal Party was as left as all get out, still lost the last election. I'd suggest that you stick to commenting on New South Wales politics, getting your party elected there, before you start giving free advice that's helpful to the Labor Party, but not helpful to the federal Liberals, who are doing a much better job of getting into the fight. Shush. After the break, the New South Wales government gives public servants a list of more than 40 special days that it says are of significance in the calendar this year. When you see what crazy and divisive days these are, you'll wonder who's in charge of this asylum. Plus, Chris Bowen does it again. Another green scheme goes bung. Oh, woke culture, it's drowning us, isn't it? And governments are encouraging, they're even funding it. I mean, you take the New South Wales government, its Diversity and Inclusion Office, can you believe government departments have these things now? Diversity Inclusion Office. It can't have anything useful to do because it's just mailed out to 20,000 public servants a list of special days they should be sensitive about. Days of significance, it calls them. Well, our investigations producer, Taylor Albach, he dug into this and look, it's bizarre. Here are just some of the occasions that they want public servants to mark or respect. There's Lesbian Visibility Day. Apparently lesbians on other days are invisible. Who knew? There's World Braille Day. Sounds a bit worthy. The International Transgender Day of Visibility. More of those invisibles on other days. I mean, I thought transgender was just about every day these days, but no, a day for them. International Non-Binary People's Day. That's on July 14, which used to be Bastille Day, now far worthy, of course. National Sorry Day, Wear It Purple Day. How about this, the World Menopause Day, for something that most women already mark every month. World Menopause Day. I mean, seriously? There's 2 pages of these days, and some are even weeks. 49 of them in all. 10 devoted to Indigenous people. Now, public servants are going to be so busy raising consciousness, there's going to be little time to raise a sweat doing real work for taxpayers. And the work that went into this Diversity Information Office says they had to draw on our Aboriginal people and culture team. It's got a team for just that. And our employee networks. It's workers of groups called Rainbow Connections, Disability Employee Network, and Culture Connect. And they've all been busy with this. How many hours have they slaved away on the taxpayer's dime? Now, in case you were asking, yes, they do at least put Australia Day in their list, but it's referred to as Australia Day / Survival Day. You'd guess that, wouldn't you? And Christmas Day isn't even mentioned. Joining me are Daniel Wild, Deputy Executive Director of the Institute of Public Affairs, and Evelyn Ray, Sky News presenter and regular commentator on this show. Aren't we lucky? Look, Evelyn, what do you make of this list?
I think we need to start calling it what it really is, Andrew, and that is wokeism is the new state religion. They have their priests and prophets, they have their religious texts, they have their blasphemy laws, and of course, like all religions, they have their holy days. And these holy days, being so many and so diverse, because it's the longest route around saying what it is that they refuse to acknowledge. And I can bet that those days celebrate every group imaginable in society except for the obvious, the straight, white, Christian male. Do you notice that it excludes that? Because that's all that it really is. Anything that isn't the straight, white, Christian male is what they are celebrating. And let me tell you, if they have time to worry about inventing holidays for their new state religion, then obviously we are paying them far too much money.
Evelyn, beautifully put. Daniel Wild, come in off the long run. What do you make of this list?
Well, where to start, Andrew? I mean, the first thing to say is it's divisive. And it's another example of how so many of the major institutions of our society, but particularly the state and federal governments, are promoting this poisonous and divisive ideology rather than finding days to promote our differences and to remind us of how we're separate. We should be celebrating days that unite us around our shared values. And I think Australians have had enough of this. We've seen that with the Voice debate. We see it with the Australia Day debate every single year. We want to be united rather than having this divisive ideology of identity politics being pushed onto us through pretty much every single major institution of society.
Well, let me back you up on exactly that point. I mean, I went through all these days and I found that the days devoted to dividing us by race or origin, like if you're an immigrant or something like that, race or origin or sex or gender, all the identity politics things, there are 26 of them, more than half. I mean, what does that say, Evelyn?
It says that we are plagued, unfortunately, and influenced by a new form of Marxism. And that separates, society into two categories. And like I said before, it's done it for us. It's separated it from the white, straight, Christian male, and then everybody else. And like I said, all this says is who the villain is. It's pretty obvious. They've decided that there's an oppressed person, there's an oppressor, and there's a victim. And everybody who's got a day is a victim. And today, in 2024, victimhood is currency. And so it's obvious what they're doing. And like was said previously, wouldn't it be nice if we could celebrate the things that unite us, especially after the really difficult few years that we've had in our country?
Well, I don't just think it's nice. I think it's actually now critical. I mean, instead of this habit of setting up different identity groups and setting them at war with each other, I think it's quite dangerous. So the government's role is not to divide, it is to unite. People will divide naturally and sometimes healthily, but that's not what the government's role is. It's like multiculturalism. Now, Daniel, meanwhile, the things that are meant to unite us get trashed. It's not just the government. As mentioned earlier today, Woolies is now not going to sell Australia Day merchandise. Is that fair enough?
Well, the issue, Andrew, is Woolworths and other big corporates have form in this area. They supported the divisive Voice to Parliament, which was defeated by over 60% of Australians, including 70% of federal Labor electorates, which voted no. And it's, I think, another example of how you've got the big corporates, many in government, including 38 local councils that are canning their citizenship ceremonies, education institutions, and many other civic organisations that are not only staying quiet about Australia Day, but are engaged in a relentless attack against it. Yet we know on the other side of the coin, the overwhelming majority of mainstream Australians support celebrating Australia Day on the 26th of January every year, because they understand that that's the day that modern Australia started, and it was founded on the values of freedom, egalitarianism, democracy and tolerance. These are values that speak to all Australians, regardless of your background or your race or your ancestry and how long you've been on this continent or in this nation. These are enduring human values, and we deserve to have at least one day a year where we can celebrate our nation and to enjoy it. But once again, the big corporates are on the side of the elites and they are against the mainstream, and it's taking them a long time to learn the lesson that Australians have just had a gutful of this division.
Now, Evelyn, people are saying, well, like Woolies, 26th of January, a bit divisive, means different things to different people, too sensitive. But for me, the question now is not just, is January 26th now dead as Australia Day? It's whether there's any day at all that will satisfy these critics and have them celebrate this country. I suspect there isn't.
Absolutely. Look, it was never about changing the day. They just knew if they came at it head on and told us what they really intended to do, which was to cancel the day altogether, nobody would get behind it. You know, changing the date sounds like a compromise and it sounds like something reasonable. But what it was to them was a halfway house to abolishing it altogether. What they want to do is undo and reverse the last 200 years and the British influence that we've had in our nation. They literally want us to undo history. It's that simple, and it's been that obvious from the beginning. And I guarantee you very soon it's not going to be as subtle as they've tried to do it. They've desensitized us to the idea, and now they're going to try and normalise it.
Oh, I think we're already seeing that, to be honest. Daniel Wild, the Albanese government's holding an inquiry into whether supermarkets are ripping off customers. I wonder whether it should instead hold an inquiry into some of the things it does itself. I mentioned before power prices, but how about the Bureau of Meteorology, which in September predicted 3 months of below average rain, panicked farmers into selling off their stock for next to nothing, thinking they've had no feed. Here is Mal Peters, as a former president of New South Wales Farmers Association today on this very point.
We had Bureau of Meteorology were out there saying global warming, we're going to have an El Nino, you know, the sky's going to fall in, that'll be the end of the world. So farmers got really worried because in 2018, 2019, we went through a really bad run. We thought, hello, it's on again. So farmers were unloading stock like you wouldn't believe. And would you believe that now we've got blokes in flood everywhere and there's grass everywhere.
Now, that dud prediction from this government agency has cost a lot of farmers a lot of money. Why doesn't the Albanese government hold an inquiry into that?
Well, you're right. I think they should, Andrew. It's had real dramatic on-the-ground consequences for people and farmers in regional areas. And look, I think it's another example of questionable undertakings by the Bureau of Meteorology. I mean, you've talked about this on your show a number of times, which is what appears to be them tinkering with historical temperature data to make it look as though the temperature has warmed more over the last century or thereby than it actually has. I mean, there was analysis a couple of years ago that showed that they'd increased it by about 20% in terms of the extent of warming by changing their historical temperature data and the measurement patterns there within. So, look, there's a lot of questions to be had. But the key point is a lot of these city-based bureaucrats, whether in the Bureau or elsewhere, they just don't understand how their policy decisions and their advice that they're putting out affects real lives on the ground. And we need to make sure that in these institutions, there are actual scientists there pursuing proper methods rather than pushing ideological agendas. And as you say, the only way we can find out is through a proper inquiry.
Evelyn, Ray and Daniel Wild, thank you both so much for your time. I think it's a disgrace what's happened. But just one last thing. I mean, Climate Change Minister Chris Bowen, I don't think these guys actually know what the hell they're doing. He was demanding today the opposition give us its plans for emissions cuts in 2035. That's why his own plans, his own plans right now are falling apart. He wants them to have plans. He can't even fulfil his own. Another example today. You remember Chris Bowen a year and a half ago, I told you about it at the time, trying to tell tradies this Ford 150 electric ute was their future, that it goes like you wouldn't believe, he said. That's if you ignored the fact that it can't actually tow much and costs more than $100,000 for the cheapest model. Well, bad news, sales have been halted. Turbocharger issues. I mean, to tell you what, Chris Bowen really has trouble picking them, doesn't he? Seriously, these guys tell us how to run the whole economy because of global warming. That's it from me. I'll be back tomorrow night. Up now is an encore of the Sky News documentary, Shandy's Story, The Search for Justice. Good night.